Terrilynn Dubreuil. These are my suggested watercolor supplies. This is my basic setup, and I'm going to explain what I have and why I have it. My palette. I've had this Tom Lynch palette for decades. When I was just starting out with watercolor, I tried a number of different palettes, and over the years, this one has become my favorite. It has a cover on it. It's a light, special plastic. I'm not thrilled with plastic, but it's light and easy to carry around. The nice thing about this cover is that it doubles as a mixing area or a place to hold your tools. This is my basic layout. I start with the rainbow of colors, but I basically go yellow, red, blue, and a hint of green. I don't need green because it's so easy to mix with blues and yellows, but for convenience, I often have a sap green. So within my palette, my primary colors are a warm and a cool of each of the primaries. My cool yellow is my lemon yellow. My warm yellow is my cadmium yellow, or anything in that family. I have a cool red, something in the alizarin crimson family. A warm red, my cadmium red. This is extra. I have my ultramarine blue, which is a cool blue, and it's the color I probably use the most on my palette. I have a warm blue, which is a Terrilynn blue. And then I have primarily two earth tones. Burnt umber, which I use a lot. Between my burnt umber and my ultramarine blue, that's how I make most of my darks. I also have yellow ochre. And then the next color I would add would be burnt sienna or something in that family. The extra colors on my palette just kind of fill the wells. I have this permanent purple or violet. I do have a cobalt blue, just kind of a straight ahead in between blue. The sap green, and I have ivory black. I do not use Payne's gray because Payne's gray, although it's a very useful color, it contains ultramarine blue in it. And if you want to do a warm sky and then bring in some dark clouds around it, that ultramarine blue that's in the Payne's gray is going to mix with the yellow and create a green, which you may not want in your sky. So go with one of your pure blacks. I have a couple little extra greens down here as well. If you notice, my palette's not always clean. When I store it, because it's not always dry, I might put a paper towel in there. My sponge goes in there. Sometimes my brushes. Then I put the cover on. Actually, I put it kitty corner like this. I put it at a tilt so that the paints can dry. Sometimes if you cover them up tightly too early, they're apt to mold. So I put it like this until they're dry, but it's also protected from anything environmental like cats or kids. So, and that way when you have a wet palette, if they're like here, the paint is still wet, you always want to carry it horizontal and flat, because otherwise if you tilt it, the paint will run out and you'll lose paint. So I'll save that for later. So the reason I still have color here is I can spray it lightly, and when I bring in another color, I can pick up a bit of this so it's not straight out of the tube one color. You have it softens it and neutralizes it just slightly. If it gets to be too much, once it's damp, it's easy to wipe up. First things first, when I do open my palette, it's the first thing I use when I'm setting up my station. I will take my drip bottle and I will add a little bit of water to soften up the paint. It's great to be able to use fresh paint all the time, but this other paint that's dried up, as you can see here it's dry, is very usable. You just want to get it damp and let it sit so that it softens and the particles homogenize. If this is not the palette for you, there are other palettes. Even if you have any little mixing dishes like this, you can lay your colors out there and then get a larger white dish or something for mixing your palette. Here are my two palettes, my Tom Lynch and my Migelo. And Daniel Smith colors, highly recommended. Basic palette and my slightly extended palette. Now, my brushes and other tools. I have a number of different brushes and special tools, but I want to tell you the basic ones that I use all the time. And seriously, I can do almost all of my painting with just these tools right here. So, first of all is a 1-inch flat aquarelle brush, and this one has a nice little chiseled handle at the end. It goes into a chisel, like a nice angle, and you can use that later for scraping and a number of things. So it has multi-uses. To test a new brush, go to the store, get some water, ask them for water, wet the brush to get the sizing out of it. Sizing is like a starch, so you want to get that out. You have a nice clean brush now, and then tap it. Tap it on your hand firmly and see if the brush comes to a nice point or chisel at the end of it here. Then you know you have a quality brush. Moving on. My next favorite brush is this calligraphy brush. Anything like this. Now you have to be careful because sometimes you'll end up with one that fans out like this, and that is not going to give you a nice point. So you want to test it in the store. With these two brushes, I can do almost anything. These are my workhorses. These are the ones that I use all the time. I do also have this nice number 10 silver black velvet. It also comes to a nice point. It has some versatility as well. I'm looking for brushes that can do a number of different things. My fourth tool is probably my old toothbrush. You want a firm toothbrush, not a soft head. It needs to be firm because we'll use this for splattering later on or doing textures or a number of things. Great little tool to have. And I have a light pencil. Just something light. This is a 4H Faber-Castell. It will just lightly draw in what I want without showing through very much on the final painting. So we have the aquarelle with the chiseled tip and a nice point at the brush. The calligraphy brush. Those are the best. This silver brush is also nice. Anything in these families. And a good pencil. Plus the toothbrush, but that's for textures later on. Paper. My favorite papers. My top number one favorite is the Arches rough or cold press watercolor paper. It comes in 140 pound and it also comes in 300 pound. This tends to be a little expensive, and the reason why is it is 100% cotton. It's got a nice texture to paint on. It absorbs and uses the paint well. It can absorb it, it can let it sit on top. Whether you want the cold press or the rough will decide your textures as you paint. The pads are nice because you don't have to tape them down. They're already sealed at the edges. To take a pad off, you get a thin, let me show you, a tool like this, like a palette knife, something thin. And at the tip of the paper here is a little notch that you can slip in that palette knife in between the paper. Then, and this is important, you want to move along at a 45-degree angle to the paper this way in order to release it. If you go straight, the paper is apt to rip. If you go backwards, anyway, the best thing is moving forward at a 45-degree angle. You want to be sure that your paper is totally dry before you take it off the pad. Otherwise, that can rip the paper as well. Another good paper is Fabriano Artistico. Again, it's 100% cotton. If you're using a wood fiber paper, you will tell the difference. There are other papers as well that are 100% cotton. That, I think, is probably one of the most important things. So check that out and treat yourself to good paper. A nice thing about quality paper is that you can use both sides. So this was a little painting I did a while back for a class demo. And it's a nice little painting, but I might not want to sell it, or who knows, I might want to reuse this paper. I can use the edges for doing scrap and testing out brush marks and things like that. Or I can turn it over, tape it down again, and reuse the other side. If you don't have a pad that's already pre-sealed at the edges that will hold your paper down, then, or for instance, if you want to reuse a piece of paper, it's important to tape it down. What this does is when the paper fibers absorb water, everything's going to expand a little bit. There's going to be more space between the fibers filled with water, and then as that dries, it's going to shrink back down. It's cotton, and cotton shrinks. So by sealing the edge of these pads, it keeps that taut. That means it's going to keep it tight and flat. So if you are going to paint on another piece of paper and you don't tape it down, it's going to end up wrinkling with the water in it. So we want to tape it down. A little comment about tapes. I only use, for taping down my papers, a natural colored masking tape or a black masking tape. And this is for temporary. You can leave it on the paper for about a week or so. I do not recommend using any colored tape because, as we know, when you're painting, every other color in your painting affects every other color. For instance, look at this green against the white. But then look at this green against that orange. It really affects how green the tape looks and how orange the paper looks. So that subconsciously affects the colors and the way we approach the whole painting if we're using a color. So again, I recommend one of the natural colored tapes. I'm always in the habit of folding back the end of the tape so that I can find it easily. I can find it easily on the roll, so I rip it off and then I fold it back. It becomes a really good habit to have. And then I can easily tape down my paper. I go about 1/4 of an inch in, and I'm sorry, I don't know how much that is in centimeters, but you can see the highlight there, about that much. Half a fingernail, how's that? So you want to tape it down so it's going to lie flat, too short for there. And as the paper dries, after you wet it, it will remain flat and not wrinkled. Again, just fold it back, nice habit, and it's ready to go. There it is. Your paper is ready to go. Setting up my station. When I get ready to paint watercolor, I come in, I open up my palette, I dampen any dry paint in the wells. Start with small amounts of water. You don't want it swimming in the water. You want it just dampened. If you find that your paint is rather grainy because it's older, into your water you can add a little bit of this memory blue. It is basically a honey and glycerin based medium, and you add a little of that into your water, and this helps bring back the viscosity. It brings back the viscosity of the paint so it will flow better and not be grainy on your paper. Paints are damp. They are becoming prepared for me to use. I then bring out my paper that's ready to be used. I have 2 water tubs. These are great little tubs I got from Faber-Castell. They're collapsible, so I can use them in plein air when I go out plein air painting. I also have a sponge nearby, and on this I will set down my brushes. You do not want to leave your brush sitting in the water. The reason for this is that when they make a brush, let me find one that works, this shows better. When they make a brush, the hairs are twice as long as what you see. So in under this metal part, which is called the ferrule, there is more hair. They then wrap a bunch of hair with string or something to hold it together. They add glue inside this, put it into the metal ferrule, and then they crimp it into the shape that they want for the brush. In other brushes, it is simply glued in. Therefore, 2 things. If you leave your brush sitting in the water, number 1, it's going to dissolve that glue inside, and your hair in the brush will start falling out, and you don't want that. You have a good brush that will last you for decades, for years and years, if you take good care of it. The other aspect is if you leave it sitting in the water on its tip, this is hair and it's going to curl the tip over time. And you don't want that to happen. You want this to stay strong and flat. So I will rinse out my brush. I'll show you how I do that. In the water, I do this. I press down gently, twist, press gently and twist, and in the water, that will separate the hair and get any paint particles out of my brush. Then I can lay it here on the sponge where it can dry and not have the glue be dissolved in the brush. So, our palette, our paper, our water, our brushes. We're pretty much set. A couple other tools that I use a lot are these. I have spray bottles that are filled with water. This way I can test it off to the side, get it going. This one creates a rough spray. Let me see if I can illustrate this. On this paper here, as I spray this across, not sure if you can see it, but it's broken up dribbles of water here. My other spray is a misting spray, which creates a more fine mist of water on my paper. I can use the misting spray to dampen the paper. I can use this, as I'll show in some of my exercises, to give irregular spots on the paper. If it's very dry where you're painting, because the atmosphere, whether it's dry or humid, will affect the way you're painting, if it's very dry, you can also just spray around the area generally to add humidity into the air. Another group of vital tools I have are paper towels. I collect these. I have a number of different types of paper towels. See in here, all sorts of them. I grab different places. Paper napkins, things like that. I use these to help control the water, to help make textures, and they're very, very helpful and useful. If there's too much water in my brush and I'm painting, it's too wet, I can just take the paper towel and touch the fat part of the brush, say there's paint at the end, touch the fat part of the brush to siphon off some of that water. So the brush is not quite as wet, but you still have your paint at the end. And there you basically have it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me via my website, TravelingArtista.com. Meanwhile, keep painting, keep creating, and enjoy.